Oh, probably. All right. I'll bring out Marc Lamont Hill now, and we'll talk about the Israeli ad and many other things. I'm gonna give him a video call real quick. Start my virtual camera so we can see me. Hello.
Hey.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that's crispy as hell. Marc Lamont Hill, everybody, in the building. Well, not in the building and not in the flesh, but this is the best we're gonna get for the time being. I'm very excited to have you on. Hold on, let me just like do a little bit of live production because I've been live already. Normally, I usually just have like other Twitch streamers and stuff on. So
Yeah.
they're it's just I always forget I have to like describe this to someone who lives in the real world and does like actually important and good work.
This is important work too, man. I'm learning there's a whole streamer world out there that I didn't know anything about.
Yeah, no, I've look, Mark, I've been a massive fan of yours for a very long time. I remember you getting booted from CNN, which was very frustrating for saying from the river to the sea, Palestine would be free at the UN. But for those of you who don't know who you are, would you mind giving us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, man. I am a lifelong student activist. For the last 20 years, I've been a professor, scholar. I am a journalist as well. I think my day job, I'm a professor at CUNY University, City University of New York Graduate Center, where I get to hang out with amazing students, and I do my thing over there. I'm a scholar of the Middle East, as well as race in the United States, and also carcerality. I focus a lot on mass incarceration. So, and there's some overlap and intersection there too. For the last maybe 15 years, I've been a journalist as well. I've hosted at HuffPost Live. I've hosted at BET, VH1. I was a contributor for CNN, as you mentioned, and Fox News at one point. And I continue to be one at Al Jazeera.
Yeah,
where I am a host up front, the show up front every week.
Hell yeah. You're I mean, look, you've done incredible work. You also, I did not know this until recently, you also speak Arabic as well.
Yeah. I'm an anthropologist, and my field work, my recent field work has been in East Jerusalem, in the African quarter of East Jerusalem. And so I spent a lot of time, studying Afro-Palestinian communities, among others. And yeah, the language is part of the field work.
Yeah. So of course, with a serious background such as yourselves, we're going to be talking a little bit about some serious stuff, and then a whole bunch of not so serious stuff. I'm just letting you know ahead of time. So let's start off with the more serious stuff. Yesterday, while the Super Bowl was happening, Israel decided to around the same time decided to start bombing Rafah, which was coming up for, I guess, like a week. They had signaled that they were going to start bombing Rafah. Rafah is the southernmost point of the Gaza Strip, for those of you who do not know, and it is the area that is supposed to be like the last remaining safe space, because they originally forced the Palestinians to evacuate from northern Gaza, saying that there was going to be a military operation there, into southern Gaza. Then they started bombing different parts of southern Gaza, all the way into Rafah, which is where the Rafah border crossing is with Egypt. It is literally the southernmost point of the Gaza Strip, where currently the estimates are that there are more than 1 million Palestinian civilians remaining. And this was a particularly bloody campaign, as far as I understand, that also coincided with the Shin Bet doing a special operation to rescue 2 hostages simultaneously. And the cost of that was more than 100 Palestinians that were killed ruthlessly as a simple distraction. So 50 of them specifically in the bombing campaign, but 100 total. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and where you fall on this. I mean, and update people as well on the issue.
Yeah, we're in an extraordinarily uh, depressing, dire. I wish I could say unforeseeable, but I won't say that. But a depressing and dire kind of moment. What's happening in Rafah is especially troublesome right now. And you've laid out a big part of it. Israel's campaign ultimately, if we begin from the premise that Israel's campaign has not been to wage war on Hamas, but to wage war on the Palestinian people, and to ultimately achieve the goal of depopulation, ethnic cleansing, etc., then this all tracks. It's kind of the only way this makes sense. Um, Everything else will confuse you if you don't begin from the place of understanding that colonies going to colonize, right? And so the move from the south to the north, or from the north to the south, has not been without serious peril for Palestinians from the beginning. The whole argument was, oh, we're the most moral army in the world. We're the most principled army in the world. We give you notice. We do this. We do this. And what we have found is, in some ways, they've explicitly abandoned their strategies of things like roof knocking as a way of giving warnings. And they've said, like, look, after October 7th, we ain't warning you about anything, basically. And then there
Which
were the people.
roof knocking in and of itself is already like a pretty ridiculous practice, but it was, in my opinion, done specifically to obviously market Israel's actions to the Western world as though they are the most moral army. And like
Right.
what you're saying is like liberal Zionism is just gone as a concept at this point, post October
Yeah.
7th.
Right, and they've used October 7th as a pretext to say, look, we tried this liberal BS. Now we're going to just go, whole hog. And for those who don't know, the idea of roof knocking is to drop a kind of to drop a munition on, on a structure, a house, whatever, as a warning to say, hey, get out within X amount of time. The problem is X amount of time is not enough time, and oftentimes they don't even observe the rules that they say they're going to follow, which has been the challenge of the evacuations from the north to the central part of Gaza and from the center to the south, is that, you got 72 hours, and then within a few hours, people are getting hit. Or you got 72 hours or 24 hours or whatever, take this road, and then you take that road, and that road gets hit. And so the humanitarian corridors, the pathways to safety, the shelters, the hospitals, the masajid, everything that's supposed to be safe are not safe. And so against the backdrop of that, you see people now in Rafah. And so people are now in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, which again is very dense. You're talking about 25 miles long, 5 miles wide. And you got these people who are there ostensibly for shelter. And you have to understand, Gaza Rafah is supposed to have maybe 250,000 people, 200,000 people, and that's still dense. And now you're looking at over 1 million people there, 1.2 maybe million people there. And they're there ostensibly for safety. And now, because the Israeli state has decided that this is a Hamas breeding ground, and it's littered with violence and terrorism, that now they're going to do ground invasions there. They're going to continue to strike there, and so they're now asking people to move north, 20 kilometers, about 8 miles. Except now they have nowhere to go. They have no way of getting there. Lots of children with no parents. Lots of people most people with no vehicles. 1.7 million at 2.2 with no house, no shelter. It's freezing cold at night. We could list all the things that make movement almost impossible, and then the very pathways that they're taking to safety or to ostensible safety are littered with violence. And so, and by every measurable index, um, um, any further violence, any further military invasion into Rafah will lead to a humanitarian disaster. That's according to independent bodies, human rights organizations, etc. And the Israeli government, once again, has said, look, we'd love not to do it. We really aren't into this whole genocide thing. However, Hamas, they're everywhere. They're leaving us with no choice. And so, as a result, what's happening in Rafah is kind of the culmination of the last, 4 or 5 months, which is a war not on Hamas, which by any measures would be a failure, but instead a war on the most vulnerable people of Palestinian society. And so, any response we have right now, as we see another mosque destroyed, as we see hospitals being sieged, as we see more innocent people dead, is we have to demand an immediate ceasefire in order to prevent something worse from happening.
Yeah. There are people in the chat saying that like this wasn't actually a real hostage operation. The hostage operation was earlier, and that the Israeli government is simply claiming that it was a cover to provide cover for the hostage operation. So I want to issue. I want to make sure that you guys understand this. I should have said this is the Israeli military's reasoning, claiming that they were killing at least 67 people, according to the health ministry, so that they could provide military cover as Shin Bet rescued 2 hostages. Now the problem is, according to Haaretz, I don't know, chatters, if you have the Haaretz article saying that the 2 hostages were released on the 2nd of February, so that was actually 10 days prior. That would be pretty ridiculous if they were actually rescued 10 days prior and it wasn't a different operation that you guys are confusing with. However, as you all know, there's always a lot of post hoc rationalizations and like post hoc evidence gathering, evidence in air quotes, whenever there's something going on that's specific. Israel always finds, CNN will write a report on 16 cemeteries that are desecrated. And then the next day, the IDF will be like, actually, here's a Hamas headquarters under a cemetery. That's why we had to destroy 16 cemeteries, right? And it's really interesting how that always happens. UNRWA, which has been a burden, a thorn on Benjamin Netanyahu and far right Israeli sides for the crimes of keeping Palestinians alive, hiring 13,000 Palestinians, being like a major lifeline for many Palestinians, because it's not just a UN-backed organization, but one that actually hires Palestinians directly and plays a big role in their civic life, right? With schools and whatnot. This is a organization that Israel has routinely criticized and wanted to abolish, eviscerate, destroy. And then after the ICJ decision, which also, of course, featured testimonials from UNRWA workers and whatnot, Israel very quickly offered what I would, I guess, in the most liberal way possible, describe as misinformation to claim that 12 out of the 13,000 UNRWA employees were actually collaborating. 13 were actually collaborating with Hamas on October 7th, and therefore this organization needs to be cut. This organization's funding needs to be cut, which, additional investigation found out that like much of that information was also untrue, yet it doesn't fucking matter. And now they found another Hamas headquarters, like a base of operations directly under an UNRWA facility. That's what Israel found recently. So they do this all the time. There's always something that comes right after people criticize whatever specific thing Israel has done.
Yeah. Timing is always this timing is so absurd that you would think the rest of the world would notice, right? On the day of an ICJ decision, suddenly this UNRWA dossier gets revealed to the mass public that discredits the United Nations altogether. I mean, it's ridiculous stuff.
Yeah, and so it's it's very harrowing. Another thing that I wanted to cover before we get to the Super Bowl ad that ran, and before we talk about Joe Biden's like dark branded memes and whatnot, and the reception of it and how tone deaf it is, because simultaneously this like bombing campaign was occurring. That's what he was. The administration was too busy tweeting that out after they like put together a funding package, a separate funding package for Israel to the tune of what's 14 or 17 billion dollars. That they separated from the prior border bill that they were trying to pass, which is also reactionary and right wing in a totally different way. There's also another story. I don't know if you're familiar with this. The story of Hind Rajab, 6 years old, who was also executed. Yeah, and the way that the British media covered this story, I'm actually kind of surprised that this hasn't gotten more coverage overall. But this is a 6-year-old that was, I guess, found dead in Gaza days after phone calls for help. And the way this article utilizes neutrality as a weapon,
voice.
Yes. I've never seen passive voice to this degree. Like I've I've talked about how the IDF not only ironically trains cops and vice versa, but that like the media, the mainstream press in the Western world basically writes about the IDF as though they are the police, dealing with the people of color, and they utilize passive voice in an identical way. This is the most maxed out version of said passive voice. Here, I'll share my screen with you as well so you can see what I'm looking at here. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on the story of Hind Rajab real quick
it's a really disturbing tale for a few reasons. I mean, one obviously is the actual death itself, right? When this young woman was child was killed or was died in this car, the only one who survived from an attack is in and of itself problematic. I hear I'm starting to hear right-wing Israelis and other people say it was Palestinians who killed the family. I have seen no evidence of that. And we saw this girl. We have audio recordings of this girl actually making phone calls, trying to get help. And one of the challenges in this moment, we saw this with some of the journalists who were killed in the last month. Even when you look at like the family of you see like even when people are killed or not killed and they're looking for medical help, there's blockades, there's physical obstruction. It's impossible to get the kind of support that you need. And in this case, she lost her aunt, her uncle, she lost cousins. And once again, when you look at the overall Palestinian child population, tens of thousands of it are now parentless or guardianless because of the amount of people who have been killed in this. And so one of the things that we've all been outraged by in the last 24 hours, last 48 hours, of course, has been the way the headlines have been like a little girl found. In fact, here's one right here. The one I'm looking now at what you posted. A 6-year-old girl who went missing in Gaza City last month has been found dead, right?
Along with several of her relatives and 2 paramedics who tried to save her after they appeared to have come under fire from Israeli tanks. And
right.
like even in that situation, like you're burying the lead in the subtitle. I don't know how that's even possible. That like you openly admit that it's like
before they weren't even mentioning the Israeli tanks. It was just like 6-year-old girl found dead in car.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The title is Hind Rajab 6 found dead in Gaza days after phone calls for help. Like as though this was like an earthquake or something.
Right. Right.
And she made phone calls and not that like this was a car that was attacked by Israeli tanks, and then the Palestinian Red Crescent made efforts with an ambulance on the evening of January 29th to find Hind Rajab after phone calls that she made because they believe that she was trapped in the vehicle in Gaza City with 6 dead family members, and the A group said that they had been killed by Israeli fire deliberately. And the Red Crescent statement on Saturday also accused the Israeli forces of bombing the ambulance as it arrived just meters away from the vehicle containing the trapped child and killing 2 rescuers inside. It said this happened despite prior coordination between the Red Crescent and the Israeli military. We know that the Israeli military also has snipers trained on people that they wound deliberately and then shoot civilians that try to recover the wounded and try to save the wounded. They openly open fire on civilians that are trying to help out other civilians in any part of Gaza.
That is a fact. And again, these aren't outliers. This is the norm at this point. Help is cut off. Innocent people are being killed in houses, in cars, in shelters, in hospitals. And, Amnesty International just today, in fact, talked about the results of several investigations of homes that have been bombed and cars similarly that have been shot. And they say that there's they haven't found any legitimate military operation, no legitimate combatant, no legitimate target to justify this type of violence.
Yeah. And there rarely ever is, but I'm saying like be on the lookout for post-mortem slander for how 6-year-old Palestinian girls are also somehow Hamas.
Yeah, she was part of a Girl Scout troop that was connected to Hamas.
Yeah.
Or the car itself was disguised as Hamas. So, I mean, like at this point, it's so absurd. And part of what they also do, and we saw this in the States, with the civil injunctions against gangs was. They had these initiatives where they would, put people on gang lists and watch lists if you had a gang affiliation or a gang connection. But I mean, what does it mean to be connected to a gang if you live in South Central Los Angeles, right? I mean, everybody's 1 degree of separation from somebody, you know. And similarly, in an area that's dense, where Hamas is the democratically elected ruling body, they control, you know, various dimensions of the state,
Yeah.
and they're on the ground. It's damn near impossible to have a job, to be employed, to live somewhere, to, you know, to be a human being and not be 1 or 2 degrees of separation directly from the people that the state are trying to kill, or that the Israeli state is trying to kill. And so you can make a case that anybody has a Hamas affiliation. Anybody's loosely connected to Hamas. And so when they kill our journalists, they can say, oh, well, they were part of Hamas. And you find out they just worked at the radio station.
Yeah.
You know, and so similarly, they'll say, well, that car got hit. The girl, at best, they'll say, well, you know, Hind was, you know, we didn't want to hit the 6-year-old girl, but everybody else in that car could get it. And because they had Hamas connections. And that becomes the pretext for all sorts of indiscriminate violence.
Yeah. It's completely unacceptable. It's ethnic cleansing through and through. And it is a damn shame that the Western world, the Western leadership, specifically the United States of America, is not only not doing anything about this, but also offering full support, full-throated support, as a matter of fact, like cutting off UNRWA funding when America is the largest funder of UNRWA. A day after the ICJ court decision was, in my opinion, a very deliberate, very straightforward statement that they were making about how we do not give a fuck about the international rule-based order unless we are the ones who are writing the rules and we are the ones making the orders, which is something that I truly do think America believes. It's just such a clear demonstration of that reality, however. So yeah, this is pretty awful. But like I said also earlier, here it is. As far as the bombing campaign in Rafah, the IDF and Shin Bet have been working, according to Barak Ravid, the IDF and Shin Bet have been working on the rescue operation for several weeks based on intelligence. The operational opportunity came today. The Israeli Air Force conducted heavy airstrikes in Rafah as a diversion to allow the extraction of the 2 hostages, which, once again, ridiculous to claim that, like, in order to save, quote unquote, 2 hostages, you had to kill 60 people, like 60 civilian Palestinians, you know, men, women, children, elderly, specifically to do that. And it's gross. I don't think it even works, but I don't think they even care at this point because nobody gives a shit. It's seemingly like the people that care obviously are protesting, but those in positions of power do not care. And
October 7th, and they never cared, but October 7th destroys the pretext, right? So now you can just say, what happened to us was so awful that anything that happens in retaliation is appropriate. I mean, I've been told that effectively by Israeli government leaders and representatives and former leaders. You know, they say, well, why are you asking me about roof knocking? Why are you asking me about humanitarian corridors? Why are you asking me about hospitals? You know, did you see what they did to us on October 7th? And because they're advancing the narrative of Palestinian brutality and barbarity, then the world community goes, oh, well, you did that. You know, we can't get mad if anything happens to you. And I would argue, and international law certainly supports the idea that even if the worst things imaginable happened, you still have to follow the law. You still have to follow the rules of war. You still have to follow the conventions. But we also know that many of the things that Israel claimed has happened have also not been substantiated. So it's on multiple levels troublesome.
Yeah. So let's get to the Super Bowl. So this last bombing campaign happened during the Super Bowl. I think some people were saying like, oh, they did it during the Super Bowl deliberately. I don't think so. I think it's just consistent. They've been doing it all the time. They've been doing it nonstop. I don't think they timed it against the Super Bowl, even though, yes, the Israeli government absolutely does care about like Western eyeballs on the situation and like the those in positions of power in the West, at least, like they want full-throated support from. So they care about like massaging the narrative to a certain degree, even though they do a horrifyingly bad job at it. What do I mean by this? Well, I think it's because they're callous, they're careless, and they're very comfortable with that full-throated support that they've gotten to this position where they've completely dropped the pretext of even like liberal Zionism that tries to cleverly manufacture consent, and they're just straight up doing whatever the fuck they can and demanding to the world follow through. And one of the examples of this, and I think this is really interesting, is the fact that obviously Israel gets a shit ton of funding from the United States of America to the tune of almost $10 million a day. Barack Obama on his way out. Signed a $38 billion 10-year security package for Israel. They get a lot of funding from the UK as well, but specifically, there's a lot of funding that comes from for the military side in Israel. But then there's also a lot of defense. So what does Israel do with all that funding other than killing Palestinian children? Well, some of the funds at least goes back to the Israeli ministry making an ad for the fucking Super Bowl and buying a Super Bowl ad slot so they can recycle the narratives that, like, no, they need the funding and they need the support over and over again as they are personally killing civilians, killing babies, killing children in Gaza with our weapons, with our funding. So let's watch this ad real quick. This is the ad that ran during the Super Bowl. Let me make sure. Oh God, the quality is 480p. Damn, not getting enough bang for a buck here. Okay. It's called Bring All the Dads Back Home.
To all the dads. The funny ones. The silly ones. The strong ones. The adventurous ones. To all the dads held in captivity by Hamas for over 120 days, we vow to bring you home.
Sponsored by the State of Israel, hashtag Bring All Dads Back Home. This was the State of Israel ad that ran. Now, I've been saying this since fucking day one, and it's incredibly frustrating to see this ad because it's like the Benjamin Netanyahu war cabinet does not give a fuck about the hostages, okay? Beyond using the Israeli prisoners of war and the hostages as a talking point to continue justifying their ethnic cleansing campaign, they don't give a shit. They so don't give a shit that most of the opposition in Israel to the IDF's actions, right, come from the hostage family members who have been demanding a ceasefire for months now, and the protests are growing and growing and growing, as a matter of fact, in Israel. Now, obviously, that's still... there's still plenty more public support, overwhelming public support in continuously pummeling Gaza, specifically from all the polls that come out of the Israeli Palestinian citizens of Israel population versus the Jewish population of Israel. The Jewish population of Israel, according to their own demographics, of course, have simultaneously had overwhelming support for the bombing campaigns and have demanded more to the tune of like 95% or something in recent polling. So beyond that, though, there are still thousands of people that are protesting, and these guys are out here talking about bring all the dads back home. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think you've captured it pretty accurately for the most part. Now, I might disagree with whether or not they care about the hostages. I think there's a way that they actually genuinely do care about the hostages, because I think that unlike Palestinians, they see them as people. And I think that there is a fundamental kind of humanity that they can recognize in their own country, men and women, that they can't see in other people's. And I think that's a kind of problem that lots of nation states have in these types of matters. But I agree with your larger point that this campaign is less about the hostages and more about normalizing a certain kind of understanding and disposition toward the Israeli state as it continues to prosecute this war in Gaza. And so, as we watch it happening and we see people bring the dads back, and it's in the middle of the Super Bowl, you now have the mainstream American public. I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but almost every American is watching the Super Bowl, and they're now accepting this narrative as the normative one. There's not going to be a counter narrative offered. There's not going to be, in the same way that the ICJ decision, most of Western media didn't show South Africa making its case. They only showed the Israeli government responding.
That was so crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so we're constantly getting fed a single narrative, a single diet, a diet of a single narrative, and so that's very, very dangerous, very, very troublesome. So when we see that, and a bombing is happening at the same time, effect more or less, yeah, the timing is questionable. I think you're right. So many bombings happen, so many strikes happen, so much shelling happens, so many sieges happen that I mean, I could equally say they did it during the rerun of Friends. Oh, they did it during the Action News, local news. Oh, they did it during morning TV. Oh, they did. I mean, there's always something happening, and so I think you're right. I don't necessarily think that they timed it with the Super Bowl, but the fact that it happened during the Super Bowl and the only information we got access to by the mainstream corporate media was that Israel really wants to bring dads home, is really dangerous. And because the pretext of Rafah is that it's a hostage saving mission, it only reinforces that in a very subtle way, right? They're not saying, hey,
Yeah.
we're in Rafah right now kicking ass to save dads, but you can connect your own dots in the same way that on the day that the ICJ made announced its emergency provisions, emergency measures, Israel didn't say, don't listen to them, they hate us. They just at the same time, on the same day, issued a report that UNRWA and other UN organizations are corrupt and responsible for October 7th. At the same time that their highest court is making a ruling. So again, the dots are the pieces are there. You connect your own dots, and American politicians and American government representatives are more than happy to connect the dots for us as well, as they stop UNRWA funding, as they will say, hey, what's happening in Rafah isn't great, but we still support Israel's right to defend itself. Still keeping in place the framework, even if we're finally willing to push back just a tiny bit and say, okay, that might be just a little too much. 28,000 people dead is just too much.
Yeah. So that was one aspect that I wanted to talk about. The other aspect was also Joe Biden's tone deaf tweet talking about how, just like we drew it up, Joe Biden's team obviously making jokes about how the Democratic Party is actually responsible for the Super Bowl being rigged so that they can help, so that Taylor Swift can go on the field and kiss Travis Kelce, who's a liberal, and then they can say vote for Joe Biden or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what kind of right wing mania will come out of this. I mean, I'm excited to see. I'm a little worried. I assume there will be at least a couple people that end up, if things go as they have so far, at least a couple more right wing QAnon guys are gonna go and do YouTube live streams of their patricide decapitations or whatever, as the media conveniently ignores that and rarely discusses it, so they can yell about, I don't know, a couple of migrants in New York that got beat up by cops or whatever. But
right.
I wanted to hear your perspective on this. What do you think? What do you think will happen, I guess, in the American election, considering how Biden has been received so far by even the Democratic Party, and how he has treated the situation in Gaza thus far?
Yeah, I think Biden is holding tight to the strategy that, hey, being lockstep with Israel has never failed an American president running for office, right? Like you don't lose an election because of your stance on Israel, because of your fidelity to Israel, right?
Yeah.
So he's taking that posture, but I think with every campaign, whether it's cast lead, whether it's protective edge, as the campaigns continue, the access we have to what's happening on the ground continues to expand, and as a result, more and more people are frustrated, and so you now see young voters who aren't going to support this. You see progressive and radical voters who aren't going to support this. Are they going to vote Trump? Probably not, although an argument could be made by some people that at least he was not an interventionist in a certain kind of way. I think what you're going to see is a lot of people who just stay home. You're going to see a lot of people who vote third party. You're going to see a lot of people who are just dissatisfied. And then, I mean, if you look at even in Michigan, where he was going to Dearborn and Ann Arbor and other places, and the Arabs were like, "Yo, no, there's nothing you could tell us to make us vote for you. There's absolutely nothing you could offer us that makes sense. And so don't even show up," right? I think there will be a lot of people who may not have that explicit claim or that explicit warning to the president, but their voting patterns will be the same. And so I think Palestine, I think Gaza in particular, is going to be an issue that severely impairs Joe Biden's ability to successfully run for president.
Yeah. I guess my opinion on it is that.
Hey, give me 5 seconds. I just gotta let somebody into my door. I just realized.
Okay. That's
right.
fine. Yeah, go ahead.
I can hear you still.
Well, yeah, no, it's fine. I'm gonna be talking anyway to my chat, but what I've said over and over again, I think, is that it's not even just that Biden isn't like sufficiently pro-Israel or sufficiently anti-Israel, but rather Biden's wishy-washy approach to Israel. As on the one hand, he talks about how like Israel needs to cut it out, Jack, but also simultaneously offering massive weapons packages and behind closed doors seemingly offering no red lines, even though he claims that he's trying to get Israel to make concessions. In my opinion, shows a lack of having a clear-cut direction on the issue of Israel, which then makes him look weak. What do I mean by this? I mean, there has been polling done on the matter. Trump currently leads Biden by 10 points on the issue of Israel. Why? How is that even possible? Well, that's because, in my opinion, that when I look at those numbers, it's partially, one, because Trump is currently not president, right? So there's always a big benefit to that. And two, the second reason why I think Trump is leading Biden by 10 points on Israel is because Trump is consistent, at least, on the issue of Israel, whereas Biden shows inconsistency by claiming that he wants peace, claiming that he wants a two-state solution, as Benjamin Netanyahu routinely undermines him. So I think it plays into Biden being too old and asleep at the wheel, and the narrative that his biggest weakness basically is that narrative. I think the way he's handled this issue plays into that as well. Not to say that like voters are single issue voters on Israel Palestine. I mean, maybe in Michigan, but some in Michigan. But overall, like, it's not. Americans don't give a shit at all.
Right. That's 100% true. That's 100% factual. And the thing about Biden is, yeah, he's asleep at the wheel, and I'm sure lots of things are getting past him. But he, more than maybe any U.S. president that I've seen in my lifetime, because Reagan didn't give a shit about this. Reagan was trying to punt on Israel every chance he got. George H.W. Bush was probably one of the stronger people on Israel. Obama, wasn't exactly a profile in courage, but he at least was willing to to punt a little bit. He was willing to abstain from UN votes and such. But Joe Biden's like, I'm a Zionist.
Oh yeah,
he's an unabashed guy. Yeah.
Have you heard the reports? Like, I think it was like in the 90s or something. Like after the beginning of the Lebanese invasion, where he was like, yeah, no, I would do even more. I would be even more genocidal. Like he was to the right of Israel at a certain point on these issues, which is like crazy.
It's wild. I didn't even know that was possible, but he absolutely was. And so when you have that kind of position on the matter, it takes a lot. It takes a lot for him to be willing to restrain. The U.S.'s position basically since after the Suez crisis. I mean, really, that's probably the last moment of major U.S. resistance to Israel was 1956. Since then, the U.S. has only grown increasingly lockstep with Israel in all things. And the tactic and the strategy is now is to not show any disagreement. That there's not an inch of daylight, that they're shoulder to shoulder, all the stupid metaphors. Yeah. And so, Biden already has that against them. But you'd hope that behind the scenes, he'd be pressuring them. And from what I hear, there has been some behind the scenes pressure for a ceasefire, but the U.S. has no leverage. The U.S. has literally no leverage. And while he certainly wants to court left-wing voters, and he certainly wants the young college students to say, hey, we're on board with you, he's far more concerned with looking weak on this issue. He's far more concerned with Trump being able to move him, Trump being able to move him, because if Trump moves him on this issue, you run the risk of Jewish voters, Jewish American voters who overwhelmingly vote Democrat, of saying, look, times have changed. This is an extreme exception to our rule, but we're going to go Trump. That's another worry that Biden has, or just that the general centrist voter who sees this issue as a sign of a bigger unrest in the Middle East, and they're worried about Iran, and they're worried about this, and they're worried about that, and they're going to say, you know what, we're sorry, we have to go elsewhere for our vote. I think Biden is more concerned with that than losing the extreme left wing or than a 19-year-old college student vote. And so Biden's in a tough spot here as somebody whose primary interest is in, controlling the empire as opposed to making the world better. And I think that's why you're seeing such a weird kind of calculation here where they're starting to whisper. I mean, Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, has always kind of said, to Israel, hey, like, if your goal is to get rid of Hamas, this ain't the way. I think Anthony Blinken has become increasingly vocal as well. And now in the aftermath of the ICJ decision, they can at least just parrot what the ICJ says, hey, just take all cautions, right? To make sure this isn't happening. And I think that's given them a language and a kind of escape hatch to talk about this thing in a different way. But ultimately, I don't see Biden saying anything significantly different.
I don't know why you're... wait, I'm sorry to cut you off here, but you said that America has no leverage. I actually disagree on that. I do think that America has a lot of leverage. I think that at least the American track record has shown time and time again that, like, when America makes a phone call and tells you to cut this shit out, like, Israel usually follows through. There was a point early on when Yoav Gallant was the defense minister, was questioned in a press briefing in Israel as to why they were allowing food trucks and humanitarian supplies to actually go into Gaza, because originally they had blockaded it, if you recall. And Yoav Gallant said, well, America said we have to do it, so what can we do? And I think that has been consistent. Biden has actually stopped in 2021, made a phone call and told him, it's over, cut it out. We're done, to stop the bombing campaigns. And I do think that if we wanted to, like the United States, if we collectively wanted to put an end to this, I think we have a lot of leverage.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not being clear. Yes, the U.S. has actual leverage. I mean more as a practical matter, given what they're not willing to do. If the U.S. right now said, hey, the 17 million or the 14 million hinges upon you all...
Billion.
Billion, excuse me. Hinges on you all acting right, then yeah, sure. If they said, if you don't do this, we're going to publicly rebuke you, of course. If they said, look, we're going to use our UN Security Council power and authority and vote to rebuke you all, then sure. But I'm saying we know that the U.S., even at its most quote unquote courageous, is only going to abstain. We know that they're never going to condition money on anything. And I think Netanyahu knows that Biden is vulnerable here on this issue. I'm saying as a practical matter, Biden doesn't feel like he has much leverage.
Yeah, and it's wrong. And that's the issue. And I think that is literally translating even to apolitical voters who don't give a fuck about Israel in general as weakness. Why does it portray as weakness? Because all of these, like, quote unquote leaks that come out from the Biden administration of, like, oh, he said Netanyahu's a son of a bitch behind the scenes, or he's like very upset at Netanyahu, like all this shit actually reads as him being a bitch, because Benjamin Netanyahu does not care about Joe Biden, regardless of how much of a rugged Zionist Joe Biden has actually been. Benjamin Netanyahu very openly does not give a shit, and has kind of done his very best, I would say, to ensure Biden's chances of re-election are diminished from the limited positions that he has by regularly going on television and saying the exact opposite of what Biden is saying the day prior. Like, Biden will be like, there's going to be a two-state solution. Like, there has to be. Benjamin Netanyahu goes on television and says, there will never be a two-state solution. It's done. We're not doing that. That's not going to happen. And then they go back to Biden. They say, what's going on? You said there's going to be a two-state solution. Benjamin Netanyahu says there won't be. Biden comes across even more old and more feeble and more senile, where he's like, oh, well, there will be. There's different kinds of two-state solutions. So I think, like, that's why there is this in the minds of the American public who care about the optics more than anything else, and certainly don't care about, like, brown children being pummeled with our munitions overseas. because that's the American way. I think that they do see an old man asleep at the wheel, and this reinforces that narrative. And I think it's a major misstep, even if I were to, I guess, put on my Democratic Party consultant hat for a brief moment here and talk about it from like the upcoming election and how it looks and how it reads. Horrible way to go about it.
Oh, I think it's an absolute awful way to go about it. He would look better standing tall, but again,
Yeah, he would be better. I said this too. He would be better if he was like unconditional support for Israel. Like if he's just saying like, no, Israel has the right to defend itself over and over and over again, and didn't go above and beyond and like maybe talk about like dead babies or whatever, or even if he did, I don't know. Ultimately,
I mean, he goes so to the extreme,
yeah,
of saying that he saw things and did things that just didn't happen, that I think he loses all credibility with left wing voters. And again, he's never going to be seen as sufficiently tough to right wing voters. And I think other people are like, mind your business, the Trump folks. So I'm not convinced that any of this. I'm not convinced that any of this works out well for him. And for Netanyahu, a Trump presidency is the ideal outcome because Trump is willing to do whatever. Right? He was willing to actually not sign the waiver for the Embassy Act. He was willing to cut the funds for UNRWA. Now, again, Trump is not a new form of American foreign policy. He doesn't represent a shift in American foreign policy. He's just American foreign policy on steroids.
Yeah.
But it's still an important distinction to be made.
I'll say like, I think the major difference here, and I believe this wholeheartedly. I think Hillary Clinton was awful, but I don't think Hillary Clinton would have done two things. I don't think Hillary Clinton would have assassinated Qasem Soleimani, and I don't think Hillary Clinton would have ripped apart the Iran denuclearization agreement. I think like liberals oftentimes, with the exception of Joe Biden on the issue of Israel-Palestine, have a much more like still very bloodthirsty, but more restraint, more tactical way of engaging in American imperialism, whereas Republicans are very open and very honest, all the way from neocons to Donald Trump, who claimed to be a peaceful dove and not a war hawk, and try to present himself as such, while also, of course, greatly accelerating drone strikes and an unauthorized assassination of a relatively important figure in a foreign adversary after throwing apart I would say the signature Obama era foreign policy achievement, the Iran denuclearization agreement.
Right.
So they I don't think Hillary Clinton would have, they would have definitely continued along with the Abraham Accords. It would have been a little bit different probably because that normalization already exists. They were just putting it on paper. Yeah. But overall, I think this is a big deviation on the liberal side of foreign policy with Joe Biden.
I mean, he's about as hawkish as a Democrat you're going to get in office. I mean, I can't imagine anyone more. Clinton ain't far, but I think Joe Biden doesn't even pretend. He doesn't even have the pretense of not being these things. He's pro-cop, he's pro-war, he's anti-busing, anti-reparations. I mean, he's made enough of a case for himself that it's not difficult to make it clear to people that we're on the wrong side of this issue.
Yeah.
So it's not good news. This is not a sign of optimism here. I feel ready to see another Trump presidency. Let me be clear. I don't want one. Yeah. I've just accepted that we're moving in the wrong direction and that we're likely going to see one. And that's going to mean a lot of things for a lot of people, but it's certainly going to mean hell for the Palestinians. And any kind of peaceful solution will be, I don't know. It'll be so remote. And frankly, by the time we have a November election, given what is happening in RAFAH and given the conditions that we see with more than 50% of buildings collapsed now, 1% of the child population killed and growing, 10% of the population either dead or maimed, 65% of we could go on down the list. I don't know what's going to be left in November.
Yeah. It's well, liberals got abortion. They can keep pumping that. You know what I mean? That's like that is the major motivator at this moment and will be coming up in the election cycle. But even then, that's I guess that's like taking advantage of a massive loss of civil liberties in this country, and there is never any positive messaging surrounding why you have to vote for the Democratic Party over the Republican Party, whereas the Republicans are running for re-election every single day and not just once every 4 years. And Democrats remember that they have to like win votes every 4 years and have no counter messaging for the issue of immigration, for example, and the country continues to go further and further right wing with
reproductive justice is probably their best bet for that reason. You know, it's like they're stealing your right to choose. But you know, do men show up for that, right? The border stuff doesn't work. Education stuff doesn't work. This Palestine thing isn't going to work for a lot of mainstream voters. I mean, reproductive justice is one of them. You know, the Supreme Court more broadly is still an abstract idea unless you have a concrete issue. Affirmative action ain't getting white people up. You know, I'm not optimistic, man. I got to run. But we got to do this again soon, bro.
All right, thank you so much for coming on. By the way, FD Signifier hooked this up with Mark coming on. Mark, like I said, I've been a big fan of your work for a very long time. It was a real honor to have you. Sorry for yapping for too long of this interview, but I wanted to also go through the news as well.
I love the exchange, brother. Let's do it again real soon, like in the next week or two, man. I would love to do it.
Hell yeah! All right, well, thank you so much
for making this happen. Yeah, thanks, bro. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, that was Marc Lamont Hill, everybody, academic, scholar, activist, journalist, incredibly well decorated, knows what the fuck he's talking about. Phenomenal guest, and it truly is an honor to have someone like him on. Yeah, he's also cool as hell. You should do a new political podcast with him as the co-host. Yeah. What is this? Mark popping off on Genocide Joe. Let's watch one of his highlights.
I can't
Here it is.
sit here calmly when I watch these preachers. Ooh, Lord, God. And these bourgeois Negroes who will allow the church to be used as a shield for empire.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Last week, there was a protest in the Great Mother Emanuel AME Church in South Carolina. A beautiful church, a historic church, a church birthed out of struggle, birthed out of the struggle of the African Methodist Episcopal tradition, which is built on saying black folk have a right to preach the word of God, and not just to other black folk. Black folk have a right to full humanity and full participation. Don't tell me you love God and you obey the commandments of God and the word of Jesus and tell me that black folk ain't got the same rights. So the AME Church is a church of struggle. And it's also a church of tragedy. We know that Dylan Roof went into that church and killed 9 beloved saints as they were praying. So I was a bit struck last week when I saw that they opened the pulpit up to Genocide Joe. Y'all can get mad, I don't care. And people, as he...
How come we never seen Mark before on the broadcast? I've watched a lot of his I've watched a lot of his videos in the past. I've also defended him many years ago, even when he was many years ago when he was unjustly taken off the air from CNN when he was a contributor for his speech at the United Nations, as a matter of fact, where he ended the speech by saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. He is the GOAT. He is he's great. I mean, he's brilliant. Yeah, I don't know. He's a real treasure, I would say. I'm gonna stop glazing him up this hard because like I'm a big fan. And once again, shouts out to FD Signifier for hooking it up because I found out that they were friends and he had collaborated with her before, and I was like, "Yo, dude, you have to set this up." You're blowing bubbles, Law? Bro, shut the fuck up. He's brilliant. Okay, suck my dick. The same with dude. This is one of those situations where it's like, for me, like the fact that I can get someone like him on, the fact that I can get Jeremy Scahill on, like these are people whose work have, in my opinion, like they've shaped my worldview. You know what I mean? Like these are journalists and academics and people that like I've known about and have cared about and think are, you know, legitimately important people in the discourse for a very, very long time. What the fuck does blowing bubbles mean? That's some Zoomer thing or a Weave thing, not a 32-year-old shut-in thing, lol. Blowing bubbles means you're sucking someone's dick and you're blowing bubbles on it. That's what you're blowing bubbles while you're sucking on a pee-pee. Okay. Yeah, I admire these people. Yes, 100%. Anyway, it's like these people who also like, you know, they put their money where their mouth is and then gotten punished for it. Even same thing for Norm Finkelstein. As a matter of fact, like I have significantly more disagreements with Norm on many other issues, right? Especially like his other writing. His writings on like, I don't know, woke culture, identity culture, and things of that nature, I think like I don't agree with, but it doesn't matter. This is a person who has dedicated his entire life to the Palestinian plight and is one of the most important scholars on the fucking planet when it comes to accurately explaining what the situation looks like in Gaza. Okay? So yeah, he's great. Brandon's talking about Gaza again. Is he live? Is Brandon live? Did you have a take on the Kanye album? No, I don't, because I didn't even watch. I don't know anything about the. I didn't listen to it. I barely even knew that it was out. But I also don't really listen to music.